Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you guys with the most up-to-date political, economic and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in.
Okay, happy Wednesday everybody. Of course, it is not a happy Wednesday for the family of the at least 38 people who died after a fire broke out in a clothing workshop on Monday afternoon in the city of Anyang in central China's relatively poor Henan province. Based on preliminary information reported in local state media, the cause of the accident is that, quote, during the welding operation in the warehouse on the first floor, some cotton wool drifted by and caught fire, which ignited a large amount of cloth stacked in the workshop, end quote. Anyone who has lived in China will not at all be surprised to hear that construction workers were welding in a reckless manner. The fire was put out midnight Tuesday, and as of recording, several arrests have been made. The formal investigation is still underway. First up for today's major developments, I know I sound like a broken record, but China's outbreak and lockdown situation continues to worsen. Because implementation of zero COVID is currently the largest factor hurting China's national economy and threatening social and political instability, we must continue to follow it closely. One analyst today articulated succinctly the situation as it stands and the dilemma faced by policymakers. Quote, lockdowns by another name continue in parts of several cities as daily cases are approaching the level of the Shanghai disaster earlier this year. Right now it feels like we are seeing a repeat of Shanghai in late March, when local officials tried targeted and precise measures before realizing that Omicron overwhelms all those efforts, leaving officials with the choice between letting it start to rip or instituting suffocating lockdowns. Near term, I think they will have to choose the latter, as they are not where they need to be with vaccinations and hospital capacity. But even then, they have a massive problem with virgin immunity. So until they are willing to tolerate larger numbers of serious illness and death, or have better therapeutics, I do not think there is a specific end date. I know it is popular now to say March, pegged to the 2 meetings, but I am not sure why that is really an end date. They really seem stuck. End quote. In the short term, too, many economists share this pessimism. Quote, China is seeing a record level of lockdowns. It's even a bit worse than during the spring Shanghai lockdown, because so many cities are partially locked down. End quote. In a note published yesterday, the Nomura economists wrote that the path to reopening, quote, may be slow, painful and bumpy, end quote, anticipating a, quote, back and forth approach, end quote. Nomura now forecasts a best-case scenario of gross domestic product growth of 4.3% for 2023, lower than economists' estimates of 4.9%, and well below the 5% that Beijing policymakers at the recent 13th Caixin Summit stressed is required to avoid slipping into stagnation over the medium to long term. Major cities, the engines of Chinese economic dynamism, continue to restrict activity. At a press conference on Tuesday, the Beijing municipal government encouraged residents in the large and wealthy Chaoyang district in downtown Beijing to, quote, slow down their lives, end quote, and, quote, not leave the district unless absolutely necessary, end quote. Then yesterday, in a move that sparked instant anger and derision online, mighty Shanghai announced that starting tomorrow, Thursday, in the first 5 days in which a person enters the city, they are not allowed to enter public spaces. An obvious blanket policy intended to disincentivize travel to and from the megacity, which in practice will choke domestic movement to China's most important economic hub. All messaging from Beijing leadership continues to firmly stand behind zero COVID. Speaking to state-run Beijing Daily, the party secretary of Beijing expressed that the city must fight a, quote, war of annihilation, end quote, against the virus. Next up, every man and his dog knows that China is facing serious long-term demographic challenges, a trend observed in many developed economies, but of particular concern to the People's Republic of China, seeing as it has begun from a much lower per capita income level than its aging peers in places like Japan and Germany. This week, Chinese policymakers got some more bad news on this front. According to the China Statistical Yearbook 2022, published by China's National Bureau of Statistics a few days ago, in 2021, China's birth rate plunged to its lowest level in over half a century. Indeed, since the devastating famine of the Mao era. Perhaps even more concerning is, for the first time in modern Chinese history, several provinces saw officially recognized negative population growth. Among China's 31 provincial-level jurisdictions, 13 reported more deaths than births last year. These 13 comprise the wealthy regions of Shanghai, Jiangsu, and Tianjin, the central provinces of Sichuan, Chongqing, Hunan, and Hubei, the north and northwestern provinces of Hubei, Hebei, Shanxi, and Inner Mongolia, and the northeastern rust-belt provinces of Liaoning, Jilin, and Heilongjiang. As we have explored in previous videos, some experts believe that China has already been experiencing negative population growth for several years already, but this is still debated among demographers. These official numbers, however, confirm previous forecasts that the country's new three-child policy and birth support measures have failed to reverse China's falling birth rate. Quote, "There is a considerable possibility that starting this year, our country will face long-term negative population growth. This also marks a turning point in our population pattern, which will bring a series of challenges to the country's development." End quote. Hey guys, if you enjoyed today's episode of China Update, don't forget to hit that like button. And for anyone who is not subscribed already and you find this sort of information particularly useful, maybe consider subscribing, hit that bell notification, and you'll have the most up-to-date analysis and news on China when it's released. And for anyone who can go that extra mile and help me continue making China Update every day, or if you just want to show your appreciation for the work I'm doing here, Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. As always, thank you so much everybody for the ongoing support. Okay, next up, a few quick updates related to China's embattled technology firms. Yesterday, Tuesday, the State Administration of Market Regulation, China's competition watchdog, released a draft revision of the country's anti-unfair competition law. This represents the third time the law will be changed since it was passed in 1993. Caixin analysts observed that notable changes in the latest revision are mostly related to the digital economy, adding violations and toughening penalties. The draft revision of the anti-unfair competition law spells out 6 types of unlawful, so-called picking sides practices, including forcing business partners to sign exclusivity agreements, limiting partners' transactions with other parties, and using technical and punitive measures to prevent merchants from working with competitors. The rules are yet another blow to China's online technology giants, but they are hoped to improve the competitive environment for smaller players, who, in the past, have been largely defenseless against the established oligopoly. Whether this hope becomes a reality, we will see. In a piece of potentially optimistic news for Jack Ma's Ant Group, UK-based Reuters, in an exclusive and citing 6 sources, reports that Chinese authorities are poised to impose a fine of more than $1 billion on Ant Group, quote, setting the stage for ending the fintech company's 2-year-long regulatory overhaul, end quote. Reuters writes that the People's Bank of China, China's central bank, is the regulator that is readying the fine. The unnamed sources say that, quote, it plans to hold more discussions with other regulators about Ant's revamp later this year and announce the fine as soon as the second quarter of next year, end quote. Meanwhile, China's number 2 online retailer, JD or Jingdong.com Inc., in a move to be more in line with Xi Jinping's so-called Common Prosperity campaign, is slashing salaries for about 2,000 managers by 10 to 20% and diverting some of those savings towards a $1.4 billion employee fund for benefits. The billionaire founder, Richard Liu, will donate 100 million yuan, $14 million of his own money toward staff welfare funds as well. And finally for today, on the US-China front, in a positive sign of some stabilization attempts in the bilateral relationship, the US Secretary of Defense has met with his PRC counterpart for face-to-face discussions. More than one analyst has asked what exactly has pushed the Chinese side to re-engage with the US since cutting off interactions after the Pelosi Taiwan trip. One analyst has pointed out that the US side has not conceded anything since the visit, and indeed there have been more similar trips since. If anything, US posturing has remained firm, perhaps even more hawkish, with measures like semiconductor-related restrictions. Does the PRC believe that it had overreacted and is seeking to course correct? Does a third-term Xi Jinping feel safer to be more conciliatory in Chinese diplomacy? Or was it always the plan to re-engage after a few months? This is an open question. According to the US side, via an official readout of the meeting, US Secretary Austin discussed, quote, the importance of substantive dialogue on reducing strategic risk, improving crisis communications, and enhancing operational safety, end quote. He raised concerns about, quote, the increasingly dangerous behavior demonstrated by PLA aircraft in the Indo-Pacific region that increases the risk of an accident, end quote, and that the United States, quote, will continue to fly, sail, and operate wherever international law allows, end quote. Russia, North Korea, and Taiwan were also discussed. According to the Chinese side, according to state-run Xinhua, Secretary Wei Feng said, quote, the United States, not China, is responsible for the current situation in the China-US relations, end quote. Beijing's long-standing position, which likely does not go down too well in Washington. Wei emphasized that, quote, the Taiwan question is the core of China's core interests and the first insurmountable red line in China-US relations, end quote. State-run Global Times, in its usual more nationalistic manner, was less diplomatic in its coverage. Quote, resolving the Taiwan question has always been an important objective in the PLA's development, and as demonstrated in the island encirclement drills in August, the PLA is fully capable of locking down the island from external military interference. The US must understand that interfering in the Taiwan question militarily is playing with fire and will not end well for it. End quote. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. I will see you all tomorrow.